This happened late last summer. My husband and I decided to take our kids out to a small campground we've used a few times before. It's pretty spread out, maybe a few hundred yards between sites, and not many people go there during the week. Our son is 7 and our daughter is 3, and this was their first overnight trip. We set up the tent, made food, and let the kids run around. But once it got dark, they got uneasy and every little noise bothered them. After a while, they both started wanting to go home. It got to the point where we figured it just wasn't worth it, so we packed them into the car and dropped them off at my sister's place about 20 minutes away. We told ourselves that we would stay the night and we would head back for the kids in the morning. When we got back to the campsite, we sat by the fire for a bit and then went into the tent at around 11 p.m. We laid down and fell asleep rather quickly, and in around an hour or two later, I woke up and had to pee. I woke my husband up, and he got up and walked me to the bathroom, which was about halfway between campsites. On our way back, we saw a light coming from our campsite, which kind of worried us, making us think that our family was looking for us maybe. We walked quickly back towards the campsite, but right before we got to the trees, my husband threw his arm out to stop me. I stayed quiet and looked back at the campsite and watched the light, and that's when I saw the glint of silver in their hand. The person near our campsite had a long knife in their hands. We ducked down and hid behind some trees in a typical scary movie fashion. The guy heard us then move and then shined his light towards the woods. He started running towards the woods and we took off running in the opposite direction. We could hear him running behind us, and we kept checking back to see if the light was gone. We eventually were able to circle to the road and crept slowly back to my husband's SUV. We got back and then drove as fast as we could and called the police, who had us take them back to the campsite. We waited in the car while they checked the campsite and the surrounding area. Soon we saw more police cars pull up, and then the 2 original officers came up and asked us to walk to the tent with them. We did, and what we saw was shocking. Our tent was slashed to pieces, and so was all of our stuff. The police ended up evacuating all the other campers and swept the entire area and didn't find anything except a flashlight that was along the way we ran. We got very lucky that we went to the bathroom when we did, and even more lucky that the kids weren't still there with us. When I was about 14, I used to spend weekends at a friend's place outside of a small town in western Pennsylvania. His family had some land, mostly fields and a stretch of woods that ran along an old dirt road no one really used anymore. We'd ride his dad's old ATV around and mess around back there for hours. One winter I stayed over and we got a few inches of snow overnight. The next morning we took the ATV out and rode along the edge of the woods until we got bored. Then we parked it and walked in like we always did. That section of the forest had a lot of junk scattered around. Old farm equipment, tires, and just tons of debris. That day we decided to try building a small shelter with some branches and scrap wood we found. I had a small folding saw with me, so I wandered off a bit to find some branches that weren't frozen solid. I didn't go far, maybe a minute or two away, when I noticed something on the ground. It was a deer, or what was left of one, just mostly bones, but not clean. It looked like it had been pulled apart more than eaten. The ribs were split open in a way I hadn't seen before. I grew up hunting, so dead animals were not new to me, but something about it just didn't seem right. There weren't many tracks around either, which was strange with the snow. I went back and got my friend. He came over and looked at it for a few seconds, and just said maybe coyotes got it. We stood there a bit longer than we should have, then we went back to what we were doing. A little while later, I was tying a branch to one of the supports when I noticed something between the trees. It looked like a person standing still, but I couldn't make out any details. I called out, thinking maybe somebody else was out there. The shape shifted and moved behind a tree too fast to follow. I told my friend, and he didn't really believe me. While he was talking, I looked past him and saw the same thing again, closer to us this time. It was standing out in the open, but still hard to focus on, like my eyes wouldn't settle on it. I grabbed his arm and told him that we needed to go. He laughed at first, but then he turned and saw it too. He didn't say anything after that, and we both just ran. We didn't stick together. I went straight for the field, crashing through branches, not really watching where I was going. When I got out to the open field, I finally stopped and turned around. My friend came out of the trees a little ways down, bent over trying to catch his breath. I asked him if he saw it, and he just nodded. We got on the ATV and went straight back to his house. His parents didn't take us seriously and said that we probably scared ourselves. Later in the day, we walked over to his neighbor's place, an older guy who lived there his whole life. We asked him if anything had ever happened in those woods. He told us that back in the day, there used to be a small logging operation back there many decades ago. He said there was an accident, something about a machine failing resulting in an explosion. A few people died and the place was shut down. Everything dangerous was cleaned up, but not nearly all of it, which explained the equipment and debris that was back there. We told him what we saw, even though it was hard to describe. He just said people used to report seeing things out there, especially in winter. We never went back. The ATV trails we used are probably grown over by now. I don't know what we saw that day, and I don't care to go back and find out. We went camping at a state park that was a couple of hours trip from home one weekend. It was me, my parents, my uncle, and my younger cousin. By the time we turned in for the night, it was close to midnight, and I was ready for bed. Sometime later that night, I woke up needing to pee. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the woods a little bit to pee in some privacy. As I was doing so, I heard a dull tapping sound farther out into the woods. I turned my flashlight on and pointed it in the direction of the sound, but the beam didn't reach very far. I don't know why, but I moved closer to it. I should have just gone back to the tent. But I was curious as to what the sound was, because I knew there were no other campsites that way. Instead, I stepped between the trees and moved closer to the noise. After walking for a few minutes, the noise was getting louder. Eventually, I got closer, and my flashlight revealed a man standing near a tree. He had obviously seen my flashlight and was now looking towards me. I didn't have much time to take in the scene before a man started to move in my direction, but I could see it clear enough, and it was disgusting. With the back of an axe, since that's what he had in his hand, he had hammered dismembered body parts to different trees around him. That explained the tapping sound I had heard, either his axe or a hammer hitting the back of a nail. I ran and didn't think about what direction I went. I just ran. Branches hit my arms and face, and I heard him following behind me at first, but not long after that I stopped hearing him, but I still kept going, trying to run as fast as I could to get away. I had totally lost myself in the woods, and I spent the rest of the night moving in circles. Eventually, after the sun had come up, I heard my family faintly in the distance yelling for me. I was able to meet up with them after walking towards them for a while. My family already had a ranger or police officer with them. I don't remember which one because I was so exhausted. The ranger or officer searched the woods for a while after we had left supposedly, but never found any dismembered body parts in the woods. That night in the woods single-handedly made me one of the least curious people in the world now. I learned to just let things be and not investigate anything. I was about 11 when this happened. My parents left me and my younger brother at my uncle's place for a weekend while they were out of town. His house sat at the edge of a long stretch of forest with a wide open clearing behind it, which was close to a local park. There weren't any neighbors really that close, as they lived about 1,000 feet away. I liked going there because my cousin Matt lived with my uncle. He was older, 19 years old, and treated me like I wasn't just a kid. We'd mess around outside, ride ATVs, shoot airsoft guns, and sometimes just sit in the garage listening to music. That night my uncle left at around 8 p.m. for a night shift at work. By 11 p.m. my brother was asleep in the spare room, and Matt had knocked out on the couch with the TV still on. I couldn't sleep, however, as I had too much soda and junk food. After a while, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and slipped out the back door, thinking I'd go out into the clearing in the forest and shoot my airsoft gun. There was a path behind the yard that cut through the trees and eventually opened into the clearing in the woods near the park. We'd walked it a bunch of times during the day, but at night it felt longer. When I reached the clearing, I began picking up some of the leftover cans we'd used before and propped them up on some plastic buckets that we had set up. The park was closed in the winter, so we didn't have to worry about leaving stuff out. I began shooting at my targets for about 15 minutes. As I was reloading more pellets into the chamber of my gun, I heard frozen debris crunching on my right. I immediately stopped what I was doing and looked over. The sound was coming from somewhere on the bike path. I should have just turned around and went back to the house immediately at this point. However, my 11-year-old mind was always curious and adventurous, so I decided to investigate. Plus, I had my airsoft gun, so I felt invincible. I advanced down the path a few dozen feet, looking around to see what was making the noise. As I was shining my flashlight around some bushes, I heard somebody humming rather quietly. It was at that point that all the courage from me started to drain, and common sense began to kick in. I was about to consider turning around and running when I heard footsteps coming my way through the woods. I pointed my flashlight into the direction of where the footsteps were coming from. Based on all the details I still remember, The figure was that of a tall, thin, seemingly middle-aged female. Her apparel was just odd, completely opposite of what a normal woman would be wearing in winter weather. She was wearing a long-sleeved black satin dress that draped just past her knees and black high-heeled shoes. Keep in mind it was almost 10 below freezing that night. Once she saw me, she stood still, with her eyes locked on mine. One thing I do remember clearly was the expression on that woman's face. She had the look of satisfaction and malice. It was a very unsettling sight. Not knowing what to do or think of at the moment, I cleared my throat and tried to speak to her. I said hello, and about 10 seconds later, the woman started to make these weird wet sucking noises with her mouth. It sounded like she was chewing on something messily or puckering up her lips to kiss somebody. She then followed with this big toothy smile, laughing under her breath as her eyes continued to focus on me. It began to strike me that this woman who might be on drugs could potentially be dangerous. I took a few steps back as I was very nervous. The woman raised her right arm up from her side and began beckoning me over to her with her index finger, followed by 2 words, which were, "Come here." I screamed, dropped my airsoft gun, spun around, and began to run back into the clearing, and then through the path in the woods back towards my uncle's house. While I was still running, I looked over my shoulder, and to my horror, I saw the woman was chasing after me. I could not believe this woman could run so fast despite the high heels she had on, especially through the woods on an uneven path. I was about 30 feet away from exiting the woods back to my uncle's lawn when I took another brief glance over my shoulder again. She was really close to me now, and I knew that she was going to catch me before I could make it across the whole lawn. Suddenly, right as we reached the grass of the yard, I heard the woman let out a loud gasp. Not an exhausted gasp, but more of a sudden surprise, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground and a person getting the wind knocked out of them. I looked back just long enough to see the woman lying flat on the ground. She must have slipped on the slick grass or tripped over something and fell face first into the frozen grass. Thankfully, this gave me an advantage, and I continued running until I made it up to the house. As I slammed the sliding door shut, I woke my cousin Matt up and quickly blurted out what had happened to me. He took his revolver out of the closet and searched around outside of the house and yard, but the lady had disappeared by then, and he wasn't going to go into the woods looking for her. The next day, my cousin and a buddy of his went through the woods to the clearing to recover my airsoft gun I had dropped, which thankfully was still there. They didn't see anything out of the normal, but I was still scolded slightly the next day about my decision to go out to the clearing alone the night prior. I still don't understand what that woman was doing out there that night. The only thing I know is that she was crazy and clearly had bad intentions for me. I'll always consider myself lucky because if it weren't for that woman falling over, I might not have made it back to the house before she had grabbed me, and I would be at her mercy. I grew up in a very rural area with dense forests and no other houses than ours around. So my family and I loved to go outside for long walks with the dog. By the time this incident happened, I was a 12-year-old girl. On this day, my family and I were on a walk through the woods again. I needed to collect wildflowers for my biology class, and I had seen some new ones before which I wanted to collect on the way back home, but my parents wanted to go another track. We separated and would meet up back home, and I made my way alone. I found the flowers on the track, and I knelt to pick them up, when I suddenly heard the crunching of a car driving on the rough track. That was strange because there were no cars allowed in the woods, but I didn't think about it and simply stepped aside to let the car pass. It was a green Land Rover, and I saw the silhouette of a man behind the windshield. As the car approached me, it started to slow down, and I became a little nervous, so I stepped away from it a little bit farther. The man then stopped his car right beside me, only a few feet away. The driver pulled his window down, and I stared, unable to move. I saw the grinning face of a bearded middle-aged man who shouted, "Excuse me, could you help me find the way out of the forest?" I felt extremely relieved, because he obviously just wanted to ask for directions, which explained how he was so lost deep in the forest. But when I started explaining, he asked me to come closer because he couldn't hear me properly. At this point, I was really alarmed. We had some kids go missing in my area before, and my parents had always been very honest with telling me about the true intentions of bad people. Still, instead of leaving immediately in this situation, I simply stayed right where I was standing and spoke up so that he could hear me better. Ignoring what I was saying, he opened his door and started walking up to me. Frozen in fear, I simply stood there. But when he reached out for my arm to drag me into his car, I guess, I woke up. Adrenaline rushed through my veins, and I ran for my life into the woods. "Hey, wait for me, sweetie," I heard him scream, followed by the sound of cracking sticks right behind me. I panicked and ran as fast as I could. My only advantage was that I knew these woods very well, and I could only hope for him to not know which way I was taking. My knowledge was probably the only thing that saved me, and I arrived on an open road that led to my house. I couldn't see the man anymore, but I was still paranoid, so I ran all the way back and told my parents everything when I finally arrived at my house. Every time from then on when I went for a walk, I took our big black dog with me just as a precaution. On one of these walks, I followed a road and some cars drove past me, with one of them being a green Land Rover. I immediately panicked when it slowed down. I guess my dog does a good job of scaring people off by his height, so the Land Rover just drove off again.